It is time for Chapter 11. Just as the children in the Institute had ceased to believe in Little Fearless, some people in the city were beginning to acknowledge her existence. The reason the woman from the house that Little Fearless had visited had never phoned the Institute was because her husband, John, had asked her not to. In fact, that same night, John the trash collector had done something remarkable. Thinking of Little Fearless's tired, desperate face, he had risen from his chair in the middle of the touchball game. Then he had switched off the vid screen. His family had screamed and shouted and made him turn it on again. But like the policeman and the priest, he had a thought in his head that he couldn't make her go away. The morning after Little Fearless had visited, while he was putting out the trash, his eyes were momentarily blinded by a glitter of reflected sunlight. He blinked, dazzled. When he opened his eyes again, he saw that the glare was coming from a small glass bottle in the trash can. For a long moment he stared at it. Then he gently picked it up, careful not to drop it, and took it inside. That day, he happened to be working in the university zone. He was acquainted with a scientist who lived there, and John handed him the bottle and asked him to find out what exactly was in it. Later the same week, when John was collecting his rubbish again, the scientist handed the bottle back and told him that extensive and conclusive analysis in his laboratory had revealed that the bottle was full of children's tears, 12,703 to be precise. That's an awful lot of unhappiness by anyone's reckoning, thought John. He stared at the bottle of tears night after night. He started to have odd thoughts, so odd, in fact, that he showed the bottle of tears to his neighbors, who also started to have odd thoughts. The story of the bottle of tears began to spread like a virus around the city. People began writing to newspapers and phoning radio stations to see if it could be true. The rumor that the Institute was really a prison full of miserable girls, and not the city community faith school for a training opportunity and hope, persisted and grew. Finally, the citizens started to boycott the laundry at the Institute. Profits began to plummet. That was the final straw. Something had to be done. The city boss announced that, although he could not open the Institute to the public, issues of national security prevented it, he would take around a small group of hand-picked reporters and cameramen in order to prove that the city community faith school was exactly what he said it was. But many of the citizens were still not happy with this, so they decided to organize a Bottle of Tears demonstration outside the Institute for the same day as the city boss's visit. The first thing the city boss did when he was faced with the prospect of opening the Institute to the vidcam was to phone the controller and tell him to prepare for a visit. Thus, over the next few weeks, the Institute underwent a complete transformation. The barbed wire that lined the top of the 50-foot-high walls was removed and put into storage, ready to be erected again after the vidcams had left. The black metal walls were painted pale pink and covered with fake ivory to make them match the attractive walls outside the Institute. The discipline block was disguised to look like an electricity substation. Notices were put up that read, "Do not enter, danger of death." The food block was temporarily turned into a refreshment zone, serving tasty snacks and hot drinks. The Y and Z girls kept their dreary grey clothes, but they were all made to clean and iron them immaculately so that they looked smart and well turned out. The X-girls' relaxation area and the controller's garden were temporarily opened to the other girls. The small study area in the work block was extended and filled with books from thrift shops. All in all, the place began to look more like a school than a prison. But things inside were just as bad as ever. All the girls were threatened with dire punishments if they said anything uncomplimentary or unflattering to the reporters. The only girl who might have had the courage to speak out had been entirely forgotten. A week before the city boss's visit, Stargazer happened to be wandering past the garbage dump. As she walked by, she heard the sound of sobbing. She looked just to the left of a pile of worn-out boots, and just to the right of a tower of rotten potatoes. There, sitting on the ground, was Stench. Stargazer wasn't quite sure what to do. Seeing Stench there made her feel uncomfortable. First and foremost, it brought back memories of little Fearless, which Stargazer found confusing, since she had recently decided that there had been no such person. Secondly, she was bewildered to see an ex-girl crying. Cautiously, Stargazer approached the big, round-headed, red-faced ex-girl, and as she drew closer, she saw that Stench was clutching three things that she immediately recognized: a bronze photo frame, a man's silver wristwatch, and a golden locket. As soon as she saw these, Stargazer knew once more that little Fearless was not just a story, but a real flesh-and-blood person, and a hero, and her best friend. Suddenly, filled with remorse for forgetting about her, she sat on the ground next to Stench and began to cry with her. "Who are you?" asked Stench, still clutching the locket, the frame, and the watch. "Little Fearless was my best friend," said Stargazer. At the mention of little Fearless's name, Stench sobbed even harder. "Mine too," said Stench. "In fact, she was my only friend." Stench shook her head and took a deep breath. "She was the bravest girl I knew," she said. "She gave me these beautiful things. I think they belonged to my family, you know." Stargazer felt surprised, but made sure she showed nothing on her face. If Stench had come to believe that these were memories of her own family, and if it helped her to get through the days, she didn't want to say anything to make her doubt it. "This is a frame with a photograph of my grandparents. This is a watch that once belonged to my father. And this is a golden locket with a picture of my mother on her wedding day. I wanted to sell them to buy the device, but then, after I looked at them long enough, I decided I didn't want the device anymore. What I wanted was my family, and there was only one girl who could help me find them." She had so much courage. The last time she went to the city, she thought she was going to be thrown on a bonfire, yet she still went. After she was caught and taken away, they bullied her and tormented her and called her names. But she never ever told any of the other ex-girls that Stench looked at Stargazer cautiously, wondering if she could trust her. Stargazer nodded reassuringly. "It's all right. Little Fearless told me all about how you helped her to escape. She said you helped her, even though you were an ex-girl. She said you were her friend. She said you were good, Lila." Stench, Lila, looked distraught at this. How I wish I could see her again and say sorry. "Yes," said Stargazer. "I'm sorry too, because I betrayed her. First by telling the controller spies that someone was going to try and escape, and then by forgetting her. And now she has disappeared and no one even believes that she was real." "If only we could get her out of the pit," moaned Stench. At this, Stargazer suddenly stopped crying. "What?" she said. "The pit," repeated Stench blankly, as if it was obvious. "What on earth is that?" "Its real name isn't the pit, properly speaking. It's the CST, the Compound Sub Terror, but all the ex-girls call it the pit. It's under the discipline block." Stargazer blinked in amazement. "You mean she's still here? In the Institute?" Stench stopped crying too, and looked at Stargazer. "Of course." She lowered her voice and glanced toward the discipline block. "The pit is where they put the ones that won't behave and won't ever believe what the controller tells them. It goes very deep. There's a secret entrance, and down on the deepest level, there's a deeper cellar. It's cold and dark. You can only reach it by a long spiral staircase. That's the pit. That's where they put the things and people that terrify and threaten them most. That's where little Phyllis has been ever since she was taken away." "But I thought she was—" "Dead? I'm surprised not," said Stench matter-of-factly. "I think the controller must have a bit of a soft spot for her, because I've heard she gets more food and drink than people in the pit usually get, and even a filthy blanket. Usually they've faded away within a few weeks. But little Phyllis is made of tough stuff. She's weak, very weak, but she's still there as far as I know." "Have you been there? Inside the pit?" asked Stargazer, excited now. No, said Stench. Only the most senior ex-girls are allowed down there. Lady Luck, the Whistler, and Bellyache. I only know about it because Bellyache likes to complain, and was moaning to herself about how cold it is down there, when she thought no one was listening. But Stench, we must go down there. We must rescue her. Rescue her? Said Stench, wiping her streaming nose with the sleeve of her uniform. But how? I don't know, replied Stargazer. She furrowed her brow and tried to concentrate. To help herself think, she started throwing pebbles from the ground and a mountain of worn-out boots. After she had thrown the 6th or 7th, the pile wobbled. She threw another. It wobbled again. Then, with one last tiny pebble, so small you could barely see it, the whole huge pile collapsed in a great flurry. Tiny pebbles, one by one, had brought down the whole thing. And at that exact moment, Stargazer had her answer. Next week, the city boss is coming to visit the Institute. He's going to inspect us all in the exercise yard, the ex-girls too, so the discipline block will be unguarded. If we can slip away while he is there, we can rescue little Phyllis and show her to the city boss. When he sees that girls are being starved, tormented, and kept in dungeons, surely he'll have to do something. Stench tried to think, but she didn't think very long before she said, How am I going to get the keys? Stench had, attached to her belt, a ring with dozens of keys on it. Stargazer pointed to it. Won't one of those open the door to the pit? Stench shook her head. No, these just open boring stuff like broom closets and laundry rooms. Only Lady Luck has all the important keys. Couldn't you swap them for a few hours without her noticing? After all, one set of keys looks pretty much like another. Suppose we could pull it off. What would it do? They'd only put it back inside again. The city boss is probably in cahoots with the controller. Stargazer nodded. But at least I'd see my best friend one last time and have a chance to say sorry. Yes, said Stench. I would do anything to see little Phyllis again. One week later, on the day when the city boss was visiting the Institute, Stench and Stargazer were in the infirmary. Both had pretended to be too ill to attend, and each had drank a pint of salt water to make themselves sick, so that it would look convincing. It had worked. The last thing the controller wanted was one of his girls throwing up all over the city boss. As good as her word, Stench had switched her set of keys with Lady Luck's that very morning, while X1 was taking a shower. By now, all the children had worked hard to make the Institute look a lot more respectable and comfortable than it actually was. And it seemed the city boss and the controller would be vindicated from the accusations that had been hurled at them from all 7 sectors of the city. Stargazer and Stench tiptoed out of the tiny infirmary and crept toward the discipline block, hoping that in all the fuss no one would notice they were missing. The exercise yard was already filled with the rest of the girls, arranged into neat lines and wearing, for once, clean and well-pressed clothes. The city boss was chatting affably with the controller as they made their way up and down the rows of orderly, well-behaved, and apparently contented children, and the vidcams filmed them, presenting a carefully constructed picture of serenity, order, and good management. Stargazer and Stench were just making their way past the now empty trash containers when Stargazer saw something that made her heartbeat accelerate. Springing from the barren ground was a blooming white rose. It had grown exactly where the single tear had fallen from little Phyllis's blue eye when she gave her locket to Stench before escaping from the Institute for the final time. It was beautiful and perfect. Stargazer stared in awe at the gorgeous layers of lush ivory-colored petals. Even Stench could not take her eyes off it. Stargazer picked it and hid it inside her jacket to take as a gift for her best friend. Down at the bottom of a steep spiral staircase, underneath the discipline block, there crouched a small, bedraggled girl, with one blue eye and one brown eye, who had long ago given up hope of anyone coming to rescue her. She had been alone now in that hole for so long, she had almost She had forgotten almost entirely who she was and why she was there. The only people she saw down there were Lady Luck, the Whistler, and Bellyache, who gave her just enough food to keep her alive and constantly reminded her that she wasn't even a number anymore. Not even a zero. She was a minus. But still, a sliver of her believed that she was not less than a zero, but that she was truly a real girl. Every day she fought to hold on to this belief. Every day she tried to remember her name, and when she couldn't remember that, she even fought to remember the number she had been given. On one occasion, the controller briefly came to see her. He offered to let her out of the pit, but there was one condition. She had to promise, from then on, to obey all the rules at all times, and try to make sure all the other girls did the same. Little Fearless refused. The controller sighed a deep sigh and left her alone, promising to return if she changed her mind. But she wouldn't change her mind, not at any price. She tried to keep her spirits up by telling herself that even if she was fading and getting weaker every day, then somehow she would live on in all the girls she left behind. They would remember her, and she would give them hope. This gave her just enough strength to continue breathing. High above her, Stargazer and Stench had let themselves into the discipline block. As they had hoped, it was deserted. A dozen or so bleak cells with dirt floors lined either side of a corridor. Each had a filthy sink, and a cracked and blocked-up toilet, and a small, hard bed. "Where's the entrance to the pit?" whispered Stargazer. Stench indicated a blank wall at the end of the corridor, covered with peel and paint. "It's behind here." "There's nothing there," wailed Stargazer despairingly. "It's just the wall." "There's a secret mechanism that moves it," said Stench. "Where?" asked Stargazer urgently. There was a pause before Stench replied. "I'm not quite sure." Stargazer raised her eyes to the heavens. While she had come to trust Stench completely, she had forgotten how dim-witted she was. If you didn't ask her a question directly, it was unlikely to occur to Stench herself. "I should have thought about that, I suppose," said Stench slowly. "Yes," said Stargazer, trying hard to keep the irritation and panic out of her voice. "Yes, you should have thought about that. Now what are we going to do?" Stench looked even blanker than she usually did. Stargazer gave a great sigh. She stared and stared at the wall as hard as she could, looking for some kind of clue. After a few minutes had passed, she noticed a patch of wall that was discolored in a slightly different way from the rest. It was hard to see, what with all the peel and paint and damp stains, but Stargazer had remarkably sensitive eyes, trained to notice the smallest of details after nights and nights of looking at the stars and trying to work out their meaning. She put her fingers on the mark and pressed. The wall itself seemed to move backwards slightly, and then what turned out to be a concealed door sprang open to reveal another door, this time with a clearly visible handle. Stargazer tried it. It was locked. Stench stepped forward and began fumbling with a circle of keys that she had taken from Lady Luck. One of them fit, and the door opened. Beyond it, dimly lit by flickering naked bulbs, was a great spiral staircase. They followed it down and down, very deep indeed. It got darker and darker and colder and colder. Eventually, they reached a landing with an unmarked door. "Could this be it?" asked Stargazer. Stench pushed the door open. Inside was a large room, starkly lit and containing nothing but scores and scores of filing cabinets. There was a sign that said, "Records and Declassification Department. Authorized access only." "Waste of time. Let's keep going down," said Stench, already turning back toward the door and the corridor beyond. "Just hold on a minute," said Stargazer. She walked over to the nearest filing cabinet and pulled it open. The drawer was full of carefully ordered papers. "Come on, Stargazer," hissed Stench. "We haven't got much time." "This might be important," replied Stargazer, urgently searching through the papers. She sat cross-legged on the floor and started flinging pages around to try to make sense of what was there. "Oh, my," she said after she had examined some of the papers. She stared around her at the mess on the floor. "What is it?" asked Stench, slowly following her gaze. When she realized what she was looking at, her mouth fell open. The floor was covered not just in papers, but in photographs. Photographs of boys, girls, women, and men. Thousands of them. Many of them they did not recognize, but some they did. They were photos of girls who had once been at the Institute. Here at last was the key to what was happening to the girls when they left the Institute. Gingerly, Stargazer picked up a picture of a girl she remembered. A very jolly, hard-working Y-girl who always did what she was told and kept out of trouble. Underneath the photograph was her number. Then a lot of other numbers. There were her height, her weight, her age, the color of her eyes. The details went on forever, to an almost insane extent. The size of the girl's feet, the color and texture of her hair, distinguishing marks and scars, an endless list of meaningless details. There was a sheet accompanying these details, on headed notepaper. The Institute, a division of the 10 corporations, authorized by the city boss. Subject report. The subject has proved to be a good and conscientious worker at the Controllers Institute and has produced, during her time there, a significant profit contribution. We have now approved her transfer to our partners, the Adult Institute, where she remains. After a difficult period of settling in, as is normal when inmates are transferred to the post-adolescence sector, oh my god, I cannot read this. After a difficult period of settling in, as is normal when inmates are transferred to the post-adolescence sector, severe discipline was necessary to ensure her inevitable acquiescence. She is now once again a productive member of the Adult Institute, operating as a bullet primer in the Central Weapons Factory to help in the ongoing armed struggle against out-of-cityers and different guarders. We confirm she will stay on an indefinite basis and help produce a significant increase in turnover. Stargazer couldn't read anymore. She picked up another report, this time of a boy. It was the same story, and another girl, and another boy. It was all the same story. There was only one place the orphans and the lost ones and the wanderers and the refugees and the vagabonds and outsiders went when they grew up. It wasn't back to their families. It was to another institute, just as bleak and hopeless as the one they came from. And no one in the city, no one anywhere in the world, was taking any notice. Stench wanted to break down there and then. "There's no escape. Ever," she said despairingly. "Not unless we do something about it ourselves," said Stargazer in a suddenly steely voice that Stench had never heard from her before. "Pick up as many of these pieces of paper as you can and put them in your pockets." Stench, being a huge girl, had an enormous coat with about 5 large pockets, so she was able to cram scores of reports into them. Then, aware that time was running out, they hurried back out into the corridor and down more and more levels of the pit until they reached what seemed to be the very bottom. Stargazer let out a hiss. "Shh," she said, and Stench stopped dead. Chapter 12. That which must not be forgotten. Always be brave, always be yourself, little fearless. I have to mentally prepare myself for this. From where she stood in the shadows, Stargazer could see someone sitting outside a cage of metal bars. It was Bellyache. She could not see inside the cage, but she knew that someone was in there because of what Bellyache was saying. I don't know why I have to be stuck down here on the day of the big inspection. It's all your fault. If you hadn't tried to run away, I wouldn't be here. What was the point? Look where you've gotten yourself. There was a murmur from the other side of the bars. Come and get you? You think they'll come and get you? Listen, they don't even remember you. They don't even know who you are. Another murmur, fainter this time. Why don't they remember you? Because you don't exist. Because you don't matter. They don't even believe you existed in the first place. They think you're just a story. I've told you before, I've told you 1,000,000 times. When will you get it? You're no one. No one. No one. This time, only silence answered Bellyache's terrible words. Stargazer felt anguished and fearful, but excited that they were so close to rescuing Little Fearless. Bellyache droned on. The other ex-girls get all the fun. I'm the only one who... But Bellyache never finished her sentence, because Stench had clamped her hand over her mouth. Sometimes I wish you would look on the bright side of things for a change, said Stench, and with that she whipped Bellyache's leather scourge from her belt and stuffed it in her mouth, and secured it in place with a handkerchief. Then produced some rope and tied her up. Bellyache lay on the floor, spluttering and writhing. Peace and quiet at last, said Stench. Stargazer was fumbling at Bellyache's belt, where there was a big brass key attached. The key to Little Fearless's cell. Stargazer unlocked the door and pushed it open. She saw a small figure lying on a plain wooden bench on the other side of the cage. The figure was so thin and pale, it was hard to know if it was Little Fearless or not. Her hair had grown back a little bit, but was dirty and tangled. She wore an old pair of striped pajamas that looked like they had never been washed. Only when she opened her eyes to reveal one brown eye and one blue eye could Stargazer be sure that it was her best friend. Little Fearless's eyelids flickered as if she couldn't quite make out what she was seeing. Her gaze seemed far away and clouded, and when she finally did raise her head, she looked first at Stench. Little Fearless was so tired and weak, she could hardly manage to be surprised. Hello, number... She seemed to struggle for a moment. Whoever you are, have you come to mock and curse me? No, said Stench. Of course not. I remember you, though I can't remember your name. It was you who helped me escape from the Institute. You were the queen of the hills and valleys of the trash heaps. Stench lit away, quite unable to speak. So shocked was she at the sight of Little Fearless in that awful hole. Stargazer was staring at Little Fearless. She felt both joy at seeing her best friend again, and horror to find her so pale and faded away. Little Fearless brought her one brown eye and her one blue eye to rest on Stargazer. For a brief moment, a light appeared in them. I know you, she murmured. I'm sure I do. You're not an ex-girl, you're someone. What are you doing down here? Little Fearless, it's me, Stargazer. I've come to take you away from this place. Little Fearless's eyelids flickered, closed, then opened again. I do remember you, I'm sure. You used to be my friend when I was a real girl. Oh, Little Fearless, said Stargazer, and then she fell silent. After a while, Little Fearless spoke again. The ex-girls say no one remembers me. I remember you, said Stargazer weakly. I know it can't be true that I have been forgotten, because I did it all for them, the escaping, to find their families. Do they tell stories about me? What do all the girls say about me now that I am gone? Asked Little Fearless. They say... I do not know how to tell you, said Stargazer, barely above a whisperer. They can say I am bad or a liar or a thief. They can say I am a traitor or a fool. These things are untrue, so they do not matter." "They don't say those things," said Stargazer. "They can say I pick my nose, that I forget to brush my teeth, that I am sometimes stubborn and hot-headed and don't put my clothes away in a tidy pile at night. You can tell me, I don't mind." "No," said Stargazer, "they don't say any of those things." A look of puzzlement passed across little Felis's face. Then, suddenly, with what appeared to be her last remaining strength, she raised herself up and looked directly into Stargazer's eyes. The brown and blue of her irises seemed to burn with a strange light. "They do remember me, don't they?" Stargazer hesitated. It was only for half a second, but little Felis was watching her face with all that was left of her strength. In the space of that tiny hesitation, little Felis collapsed back onto the bench as she saw the truth that was written in Stargazer's eyes. At that moment, Stargazer stumbled back, stricken with fear and wonder. Filling her field of vision were 3 angels. They had come because they had heard a sound only angels can hear. It was the sound of a human heart breaking. "What are you looking at, Stargazer?" said Stench. "Can't you see? Can't you see?" whispered Stargazer, rapt and terrified. "There's nothing there," said Stench, bewildered. Little Felis gave a gasp, and Stargazer saw the 3 angels descend and lift little Felis's spirit out of her worn and racked body. One was the angel of compassion, whose face was infinitely agonized and beautifully perfect at the same time. The angel of courage had 100 faces. Little Felis knew every one of them. The angel of truth had more faces than anyone could count, and many were wonderful, and still more were too terrible to gaze upon. The 3 angels rose, the spirit of little Felis flickering between them like pale fire. Stargazer suddenly began to speak, all in a rush, as if she could call little Felis back. "Of course they remember you. They talk about you all the time. You're a hero. You're loved by everyone. You've given them all strength. You've—" Little Felis's eyes seemed to flicker, and the light in them grew a little fainter. Then they closed. Stargazer took hold of little Felis and began to shake her, gently at first, then harder and harder, almost crazy with grief. She drew out from inside her coat the white rose she had picked from the garbage dump. "I thought you were white rose, little Felis. I knew you loved them." The vision of angels had evaporated. There was only thin, dank air. Stargazer held the white rose out toward little Felis, close enough to let her smell the scent. She stood like that for a minute without moving, then gently pushed the rose into a lock of little Felis's dirty, tangled hair. "The angels have taken her," said Stargazer softly. "She has returned to the great nothing." Stench, stunned with grief, did not speak. Then Stargazer felt something so strong well up inside her that she thought she would fall over. It felt as if all the pain and anger in the world, and all the determination and all the outrage at the crimes that had ever been committed were inside her. She cried a cry that seemed to reverberate on the surface, far above them. Then she bent and picked up the dead weight of little Felis's body in her thin, pale arms. "Let me carry her," said Stench sadly. "I'm stronger than you." "No," said Stargazer so fiercely that Stench took a step back. "I owe her this journey." So it was that Stargazer carried little Felis's slack body all the way up the spiral staircase. Her arms felt like lead, and her legs felt as if they were going to collapse at any second, but she kept going. She carried little Felis out of the discipline block and toward the exercise yard. The air was cold and the sky was brown as a puddle. The great metal walls, although painted pink and covered with fake ivory, seemed as dull and oppressive as ever. "What are we going to do?" asked Stench. "We're going to make the other children remember what must not be forgotten anymore. Stench, watch out ahead." For just at the entrance to the exercise yard, where the inspection was at that moment taking place, was the Whistler. Immediately, Stench disappeared into the shadows. Whistler was whistling. "Who killed Cock Robin? I said the sparrow. With my bow and arrow, I killed Cock Robin." She spotted Stargazer carrying little Phyllis and immediately began to move toward them. She stopped whistling. But now another whistle rose up from somewhere. "Ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down." And with the "down," the Whistler felt a strong pair of hands force her to the ground and bind her hands. Then a length of duct tape was fastened across her mouth. Stench stood over her and muttered, "Try and whistle now." The Whistler turned red with fury. Stargazer, carrying the body of little Phyllis, just walked on. Stench grabbed the Whistler by the collar of her jacket and pulled her through the dirt after her. The city boss was standing on a high podium 10 yards in front of the first row of girls, talking into a microphone. The podium was covered in lush red carpet in honor of his visit. The ex-girls were dotted here and there among the gathering, watching the Y and Z girls carefully for any signs of misbehavior. Up on the podium with the city boss and the controller were Soap Dish, Tattle, Beauty, and Lady Luck. Their attention was focused on the city boss, who was making an elegant and nicely crafted speech. The controller gazed at him in admiration. Soap Dish saw Stargazer first, then Tattle, then Beauty. They watched, riveted to the spot, the faces frozen in shock. Then, one by one, the eyes of all the Y and Z girls were drawn to the sight of Stargazer, now staggering under the weight of her burden. Although she was exhausted, still she wouldn't give it up. The vidcams swung away from the city boss to take in this extraordinary vision. Eventually, almost every eye in the Institute, and many thousands beyond, watching the vid screens pictured being broadcast in the city, fixed on the tiny child carrying the filthy, broken body. Stargazer kept walking toward the podium, where the city boss was still blithely talking, oblivious to what was going on below him. She reached the bottom of the steps that led up to the podium. Slowly Stargazer began to ascend. Transfixed, not one of the ex-girls moved to stop her. When, finally, the controller and the city boss turned to follow the gaze of all the girls, the controller let out a loud cry of amazement. Then he immediately started yelling at the ex-girls, while the city boss looked on, astonished. "What are you waiting for? Grab them! Get them out of here!" But seeing Stargazer holding little Phyllis's body, and then the Whistler being dragged behind them by Stench, who looked huge, red-faced, and extremely determined, not one of the ex-girls moved a muscle. The controller stood stock still, although his eyes swiveled in panic behind his tinted glasses. Then Stargazer, her eyes wet with tears, reached the top of the high podium and, still carrying little Phyllis, walked to the microphone where the city boss was standing. She looked up at him. So fierce was her gaze, he moved away in alarm. She took his place. Then, with her last reserves of strength, she lifted the tiny, wasted form of little Phyllis above her head and spoke. The voice that came out was enormous, 10 times the size of her normal voice. The smallness of her frame meant she could not reach the microphone, but everyone within the 4 walls of the Institute could still hear her, as clear as a bell. "Here she is! Here's the girl that doesn't exist!" She laid little Phyllis gently on the red carpet at her feet, then straightened up again. "Look at her! She's so cold and dead and real! Remember her, because in forgetting her, you have destroyed her. You have lied to yourselves in forgetting her. You have lied in this place that is made out of lies. You have lied because you thought that if you did it long enough and hard enough, you could escape this place and become real people. But that's a lie too. I've got proof that the only place we're going after we grow up is another House of Nowhere. Stench let go of the whistler, took from her pockets the reams of papers that she had picked up from the pit, and flung them into the crowd. The girls immediately broke their lines to grab them. As they read the documents, there were mutterings of anger, which grew, then faded. There was a silence that seemed to go on forever. The city boss tried to leave the podium, but found his way blocked by Tattle, Soapdish, Beauty, and Stench. Tattle, her eyes filled with shame and grief, had been the first to rip the X letter off her lapel. Soapdish, then Beauty, quickly followed suit. The controller, momentarily panicking, fell to his knees and began praying to Eidolon. Stargazer looked down at him with sorrow and disdain. You should not pray to Eidolon, or Ormazd, or any other god. You should pray to the stars, to the universe, for ourselves and for our lives, brief and imperfect as they are. Give thanks to the astonishing miracle that there is something rather than nothing, that we all exist in the endless void. We should worship one another. We should worship our sameness as well as our uniqueness. We should worship what makes us truly human: compassion, courage, and truth. Stargazer's words echoed around the walls of the Institute, met only by silence. It was the controller who broke it. He was gazing upon the face of little Fearless. It seemed that only now did he recognize her. He rose unsteadily, and he spoke a single word in a cracked, heartbroken voice. Fearless! What did my voice just do? At that single sound, the girls blinked. It was as if, all at once, they had awoken from a dream. Tata was the first to echo the controller's cry. Little Fearless! Then Soapdish and Beauty. Fearless! Fearless! Within seconds, the whole of the Institute was shouted at the top of their voices. Fearless! 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 Outside the Institute, thousands of people were demonstrating, and they had been getting restless. A counter-demonstration was taking place that had been organized by the city boss. These stooges had been shouting that the tears were forgeries, just tap water mixed with salt. Then a man dressed in the vestments of a priest stood up. He spoke, and his voice soared above the throng. I remember this girl, said the priest. She came to see me, too, just as she came to see John. She tried to tell us about the Institute. Here he nodded at the man John, who had helped to organize the demonstration, and had arrived in his huge garbage truck, festooned with banners that read, Stop the Tears Now. She asked for help. I am ashamed to say I did not help her, because she was dirty and bedraggled and just a child, so I did not believe her. All the same, I have never been able to forget her. Now I feel sure that she was telling the truth. The argument broke out more furiously than before. Such a cacophony of voices was raised that the police, drafted to keep order, shifted on their feet uncomfortably. They didn't want a riot on their hands. Then another voice rang out, this time through a police megaphone. I, too, remember this girl, the voice said. I have not been able to forget her, however hard I've tried. She came to my police station, but I am ashamed to say that I ignored her. I didn't believe her because she was an outsider, an out-of-cityer, and a vagabond. But now I have come to believe that what she told me was true. The crowd looked, and they saw, to their amazement, that it was one of the policemen who was speaking. He took off his helmet, threw it on the ground, stamped on it, and joined the thousands of demonstrators demanding an end to the tears. Suddenly, what seemed like a trickle of rhythmic noise began to gather itself from inside the walls of the Institute. At first it was a thin whisper, but as it began to build, it became louder and louder, until it practically drowned out all the noise of the demonstrators. At first, no one could make out what the noise was. Then gradually it became clear from the pitch and tone that it was the masked voices of thousands of girls. They were repeating one word over and over: fearless, fearless, fearless. The noise grew, and the people at the demonstration began chanting too, while the people from the counter demonstration tried to shout them down. "We must go into the institute," shouted the policeman who had thrown off his helmet. "Yes," echoed the priest. "We can't hide from ourselves any more." "We'll tear down the gates," cried the man named John. In front of them were the two vast gates of the institute, one in the shape of a D and the other the shape of a reversed D. When they were closed, they formed the sign of a zero divided into two parts, one painted black and one painted white. John jumped into the cab of his garbage truck, revved the engine, and drove it straight through the zero-shaped gates of the institute, splintering wood and metal like matchsticks. The crowd flooded forward, the police helpless to stop them. Inside, the chanting of 999 girls was echoing around the institute. "Fearless! Fearless!" The city boss, still on the podium, had a look of fierce panic on his face. He shouted and gestured at the policeman who was at the head of the crowd. He noticed that for some reason, this policeman wasn't wearing a helmet. "Thank goodness you've come," said the city boss to the policeman. The children are running wild. Round them up and put them back in their dormitories." The place was in chaos. Girls everywhere were starting to tear down the ugly buildings where they had had to live and work and suffer all these years. Some had seized the matches that the ex-girls used to light cigarettes, and had set the hated control block on fire. Tons of flame began to appear from the controller's headquarters. To the city boss's amazement, the policeman at the head of the crowd of demonstrators took no notice of his order, and instead bellowed right back at him. "You told us this was a school, a place of re-education and faith, but it is a prison and a place of misery and hopelessness. You did not tell the truth." The city boss held out his hands in a gesture that was at once hopeless and desperate. "The truth has many faces," he said. There was sorrow in the air, and rage, and the threat of violence. To his right, the city boss was aware of flames rising higher from the control block. And all the time the vidcams watched him, broadcasting his every response to the people of the city. He could see that things were out of control and had struggled to find words that would placate the mob and restore his authority. He looked down at the crowd, his features arranged into a picture of regret and contrition. He smoothed down his jacket and patted his hair into place. He shot a long, sorrowful glance at little Phyllis, prostrate on the podium a few feet away from him, and spoke to the crowd in a low, plangent voice that nevertheless echoed to the top of the walls. "Citizens, a great wrong has been done here, and it is a great wrong for which I cannot shrug off all responsibility. You elected me as your leader, and I have failed you." He left a long pause so the crowd could register the genuineness of his sorrow and the humility of his repentance. "Today, everything has changed. Everything has changed because of this poor, abandoned little girl. I confess I have been guilty, not of evil, but of something just as bad. Guilty of ignorance, guilty of indifference, guilty of seeing only what I wanted to see." The crowd cheered, and many of them started to look smug and self-satisfied that they had defeated what they had now decided was the face of all wrongdoing. But the city boss gathered himself and looked down at the crowd defiantly. "But before you hand me from the nearest tree and then walk off in triumph, listen to me. If I am dirty, then you are not clean, and all the laundries in the world cannot wash away our stains. You voted for me because you were scared. You voted for me because you valued order more than justice. You voted for me because of the secret hatreds in your own hearts. You voted for me so I could carry your sins for you. So don't suddenly tell me that you are all innocent. You wanted this. This is your doing as much as mine. What do you think politicians do? Do you think they are wicked and out to exploit you? You are wrong. They are here to give you what you want. That is how they keep their jobs. What you wanted was to feel safe. What you wanted was to feel special. What you wanted was to feel like good people. And I gave you those things. Those illusions. Those lies. And now you crucify me for doing your bidding? A silence fell over the crowd. You are no better than me. I am leaving the city and shall not come back. Then you can elect someone who is as kind, upstanding, and virtuous as you all are, intoned the city boss, both magisterially and sarcastically. There's one last thing for me to do before I give up the chains of office and return to ordinary citizenship once more. He turned to the controller, who was huddled in the corner of the podium, his arms wrapped around himself, his face tight with what could have been either grief or terror. It seemed he feared the crowd would tear him to pieces. Controller, you are relieved of your duties. You are no longer an employee of the city. You are finished, just as I am. The controller fell to his knees. The city boss walked down from the podium and then out through the gates, his head held high, his hair sticking up. No one tried to stop him. The flames had spread now. A north wind had blown them to the work block. The podium itself was in danger of catching fire. Everyone began to flee toward the shattered remains of the great gates. Stargazer, exhausted, lay slumped beside little Phyllis's body. Stargazer picked up little Phyllis gently. Come, Stargazer, said Stench softly. It isn't safe here anymore. I'm coming, said Stargazer, but there's something I have to do first. Hurry then, said Stench. The whole institute is going up in smoke. Stench made her way down the steps, carrying little Phyllis's body. Now only Stargazer remained on the podium, along with a broken, slumped figure that sat, head in hands, a few feet away from her. Stargazer stared at the controller in astonishment and even sorrow. There was ash from the fire in his hair and coating his skin, making him appear even more like a ghost than before. By now the fire had reached the living block and was creeping toward the trash heaps. The controller was shaken. Stargazer could not help but pity him. She reached out and touched his arm. He shrank back as if he had been burned. It isn't safe here, said Stargazer. You need to leave. The controller didn't respond. Your what must be is now in your hands. It is your choice. But I just want to know one thing before I go, said Stargazer. There was a great crack as the central support of the control block broke in the heat, and the roof began to fall in. Ashes and sparks were everywhere now. Go, girl, go, urged the controller, suddenly breaking his silence. You must not stay here. He had taken his hands away from his face. Just answer me this, said Stargazer steadily. Stench, Lila, told me something I didn't understand. She said little Phyllis survived longer than anyone else ever kept in the pit. She said it was as if you were trying to keep her alive. And you always took a special interest in her, always. Why, controller? She was just another girl among hundreds. What made her special to you? Why was she different? Now flames sprang from the roofs of all 5 buildings in the Institute. Stargazer could hear Stench and Tattle and Beauty and Soapdish all yelling at her to leave the podium and the Institute before it was too late. The controller, still slumped on the floor of the podium, raised his head slightly. He seemed to be looking directly at her, but he said nothing. Stargazer shook her head. It seemed that she was never going to find out this secret. She rose to her feet and moved slowly toward the steps. Flames were looking at the podium's struts. She threw one last glance at the controller before she made her escape, and in that final moment, he raised his right hand to his face and slowly, deliberately, removed his tinted glasses. Orange flames danced in the lenses. Stargazer stared. In the flickering light, she saw his eyes for the first time. The eyes he had concealed all the years he had been at the Institute. One was brown, and the other was blue. Stargazer just stood there, dumbfounded. The controller nodded. It is true, he muttered. I tried to protect her, but I had to follow the rules, you see. The rules. The rules. Now he was babbling. His face was obscured by a pall of grey smoke. He coughed and spluttered. Mary is my sister. She was more than a sister. She was my best friend and acted as little Phyllis's mother. She promised to look after her and bring her up as her own. But years later they found little Phyllis and tortured me by bringing her here, saying that unless she followed the rules, she would be sent away and I would never see her again. But she wouldn't follow them. She wouldn't do it. She was so brave, and now she's... His face appeared like a spectre through the smoke. Stargazer did not know whether that was making his eyes water or whether he was truly crying. Then the fumes and burning ash made it too hard for her to see anything at all. How can you love someone when you need to crush them? How can you crush someone when you cannot help but love them? This question was left hanging in the smoke and air, because Stargazer suddenly felt a strong arms of stench around her waist, and she was carried quickly down the collapsing stairs. The controller! The controller! Shouted Stargazer. But Stench took no notice. Too late for that. It is his what must be. And she ran, with Stargazer under her arm, toward the great collapsing zero of the gates. Just as she made it outside, the walls themselves fell, and all was flames and rubble and smoke. Within an hour the Institute was little more than a mound of ash, and the controller, Ouroboros, little Phyllis's father, was never seen or heard of again.